Yeah, what? They're my teammates back.
That's fine, so for the visually impaired, I am gonna move to the front of the room in just a few. Okay.
And I'm Laura Wolfeter. I'm also a teacher of the visually impaired, and I will also be moving to the front of the.
So we're still doing technical difficulties, so just bear with us, we're novices. So I'm just gonna do a short introduction of FIT, a little bit more. So this is our map. All the numbers correlate to all of our team members that we have that cover the state of Kansas. The only network we don't cover is the Northwest here, but we cover everywhere else. So we'll show a picture of our team. They're corresponded with numbers. You want to switch that over for our picture? Well, that's a bright blue light. So here's our team members. Angie and Brandy are new. And they're all designated different county, and it is on our website, on KSSB website, if you want to go in and look further. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our new picture.
Sorry, we're trying to tilt.
That is a bright light. That is. Ooh.
You may have.
So basically what we do is we work with the networks and across the state, and we provide support services for the providers, families with vision, O&M, within the families, within the networks, and during transitions and all of that. So we are trying to encourage, when we go from C to B, to be part of that and to include the Part C providers in the transitions, because we're finding that Part B is just like, oh, yeah, we need to have more information from Part C to Part B. So we're trying to put the word out there and spread that within our networks as we're going into meetings with families and providers and within team meetings and whatnot. So we're here to support all of you with vision and O&M in any capacity we can help. And that's about as a short snippet as you're gonna get. So I'd like to introduce Heather and Laura. They're gonna go through the slide, and it's gonna be about CVI. We will be piping in, getting some information from Molly because she's your VI. So I already talked to her about, because we're providing an overview of this, but I also know that you've all worked with Molly in some capacity with this information as well. And so there's some things we might have that Molly may or may not have. So we're just going to try to marry those together. So if you have questions, and Molly can pipe in on that. Okay, any questions? Okay.
Sorry, we have the blue box.
We don't know how to get rid of it.
We don't know about live. Oh, and I'll take it. Okay, so the overview of what is CVI. Cerebral visual impairment is caused by damage, injury, or trauma to the brain rather than abnormalities to the eye. The big thing here on our clause 3, you're hearing a lot of either cerebral visual impairment or cortical visual impairment. They are the same thing. Both are CVI. It is the most common cause of visual impairment in children in the United States. And this one kind of makes me laugh a little bit because it says CVI suspected when normal eye exam. So it's not something that can be like you look at a child and say, oh, you have CVI, like some of our other visual impairments. A student could have a completely normal eye exam and could still have CVI. A student that has brain injury or other risk factors or unique characteristics present. And a diagnosis of CVI must be made by an ophthalmologist or a neurologist. We can suspect that a student, or we as TSVIs, I should say, can suspect that a student has CVI, but we could not give that diagnosis. That has to come from a doctor. Next. These are some of the conditions that are commonly associated with CVI, and for time purposes, I'll kind of let you guys glance over and just hit on some of the common ones. Cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and stroke. Traumatic brain injury is one of the big things. Anything that a student has that is affected by the brain, shaken baby syndrome, hydrocephalus, anything that is going to affect their brain, CVI is always going to be something that we're going to consider. Premature births, infections, and Down syndrome is a newer one that they're finding that CVI is going alongside as well. Heather, you want to take this one? I will take over. Yeah.
So we will be sending out the slide, or I think Stacy has it, so she's free to circulate it. I know a lot of the Kansas, vision screening guidelines have a lot of information for people, but the rate at which we're learning about CBI and the rate at which it's being researched, we are adding more, areas. So it's probably good for you guys to keep, up to date with the ones that are kind of on that list. Diagnosis confusion. Other conditions can show similar characteristics to CDI, not just visual, also autism. There's a lot of overlap in those behaviors. Children can have CDI and also other ocular impairments. So like Laura said, they may have an eye exam and their eyes can check out just fine, but you know, as a provider, that they're using their vision in a way that is different, or they're kind of like, maybe they're attending to one specific toy or one person, but to the neglect of the rest of the world. So you notice those things.
And I would also say one thing that we're seeing, some doctors in the area are writing CBI secondary to other conditions. So a student may have one of those primary conditions that we just talked about, but doctor will write on the sheet that CBI is a secondary diagnosis because we're not for sure if this is due to CBI or due to the other condition that the student may have.
Yeah, absolutely. This top one up here, I won't read all of them to you, but the delayed visual maturation, maybe a decade ago, I saw that a lot more on eye reports. I don't see it as much anymore. I think a lot of the time, maybe that was present, sure. But I think a lot of the time it was CBI. And now where neurologists and ophthalmologists are becoming more comfortable giving those diagnoses, we're seeing CBI in place of that. We can go to the next one. This is just, I took this, I stole this, just to show these 3 functional MRIs compared to one another. So the control one is a non-visually impaired MRI. The middle one is a person with a known ocular visual impairment. So we know there's something going on with their eyes. The third one is cerebral visual impairment. So it's showing activity. There's been a lot of research about how people who are even born blind, like fully blind, the parts of their brain that were responsible for processing visual information still get activated in other ways. Through other sensory channels. So just to show you that, like, I guess the reason I wanted to pick this one is to kind of show that it's more of a processing issue, and we're seeing it on MRIs now, where we maybe weren't before. So you can go to the next one. Quick note about the spot screener. Spot screener is great. It catches a lot of stuff. And I detailed some stuff up here that it will catch. It probably will not catch CBI. So a lot of the times for, at least with my work with the networks, they've already done the spot screener, they've done the paper screener, but there's so many ways that they'll describe kids, like, I don't know, we just can't get him interested in anything, but he likes this one thing, or he really likes this pacifier, and I know he's looking at it, I know he's reaching for that. A lot of the symptoms that you will see, you will not catch maybe through the paper screener or the spot screener. So it completely comes down to you being aware of the characteristics of CBI, and you may be the first person to be aware of that. You can skip all that. Why does the information about CBI keep changing? I think a lot of it has to do with money going into research, but it also has to do maybe with the prevalence of CBI itself. So we're keeping premature babies alive longer. We're keeping kids who are medically fragile alive longer as well. So we're seeing a lot more CBI maybe because of that. I wrote too many words.
I think there's also more doctors that are willing to give the diagnosis now as well. It wasn't something that a lot of doctors were comfortable with diagnosing there for a while, and now it's being more widespread.
And even still, and we have a hospital outreach team who's gonna work with, some of the local ophthalmologists. Everyone is aware of it, but there are people who drag their feet on diagnosing. It's not there's no blood test, it's a clinical diagnosis. So they have to gather a bunch of information about the visual characteristics of this child in a maybe 1 hour clinical setting where they're not familiar. So, little, there's some feet dragging, I guess, but we can go to the next one. Okay, oh, good, okay, cool. Okay, so I have 2 videos on here, and, the first one is, they're both kind of I guess, a simulation or experience video, and TBI is kind of balk at showing, simulations sometimes, not because we don't want to give someone an idea of what a person's vision is, but because there's no one size fits all for that. And so I am a little hesitant, but sometimes I think people do need a little bit of an idea, because you need to know functionally what are you kind of working with or what to be paying attention to. So this first one, on the left, and do you have to click this, like the words here? This one is a video that a researcher, let's see if this works, Gordon Dutton, from Scotland created. And it just kind of shows, it's more of a video on like complexity of array. So he has this scene, and like the more complex it gets, the less a child is able to attend to the whole scene, if that makes sense. I think it's a quick one.
I might appreciate.
You're on the video.
The short films you're about to see are attempt to illustrate how it might be to see the world with cerebral visual impairment. This is a condition where parts of the brain important for the creation of conscious vision do not work properly. The X applied to the videos are based on feedback from people with cerebral visual impairment and their carers, as well as contributions from experts working in this field. Almost half of the brain is used to create vision. Information is collected by the eyes at the front, and it travels to the back of the brain, to the occipital lobes. Processing initially occurs in the occipital lobes, and then information then travels in 2 different streams, one to the temporal lobes and one to the parietal lobes. The temporal lobes are the area of the brain which store visual memory, and the parietal lobes are the bit of the brain which allow us to appraise the overall visual scene and see one thing amongst many. It also helps aid visually directed movement. If the posterior parietal lobes are damaged, then it can be hard to see one thing amongst many. It's also difficult to reach for things accurately and find things amongst clutter. Together, these difficulties are often termed dorsal stream dysfunction. Posterior parietal lobe damage and consequently dorsal stream dysfunction is a common form of cerebral visual impairment, especially amongst children. It can be very disabling, but if it is recognised and development measures taken, the challenge of dorsal stream dysfunction can be lessened. Because it's hard to describe clearly in words what these difficulties look like, we have created these short films. The first film shows a person moving across a clear, open beach. Vision appears almost typical until the people and their dogs come into view. Then how much can be seen reduces. They can see only 1 or 2 things at a time, with the peripheral visual work disappearing, and the central window of sight narrowly and fluctuating. Once the complexity of the visual scene reduces, and people and dogs are left behind, back into an open landscape, the visual experience becomes more typical. The next film is the same scene, but without the filter. Think about your vision as the people, chair, and dogs come into view. Can you still see the trees on the right, and the hill on the left? Can you see a person, the chair, and the dog all at the same time? The people with dorsal stream dysfunction could not. Looking again at the first still, the filter hides so it's not seen by people with dorsal stream dysfunction. Walking on the open beach, the vision parts of the brain have less information to deal with in that. As soon as the people are seen, the brain needs to start mapping the new map. As they get even closer, there's more to make sense of. This overloads the capacity of the brain and the central visual window narrows. The back in the open is less than that. The window vision gets bigger, it becomes much more typical again.
Okay, so that, even though that's one little snippet and he used words like dorsal stream dysfunction, all of that is housed under the umbrella of CBI. And it's probably more of a deep dive than I would normally do, but I wanted that simulation.
And how would I get back to your
The other video was a video from a young man in Australia, just giving his experience with living with CBI, and it was kind of similar where like the complexity of the scene.
We'll be better next time, guys, I promise.
Sorry, and I think the last time we had a lunch and learn, we had the wrong cord, and so we couldn't even get the projector going. So you're in really good company.
Okay, well, good. Hopefully we'll just get better. This is baseline. I'm talking at level.
We got the projector on. You saw a couple of slides. Now we just can't find our slideshow again.
Projector from the van inspection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I'm like in a different field.
If someone knows how to do it, feel free. You're not offending us at all. We all have Macs and they are so confusing.
I mean, that's really cool. Like, yeah. It's funny because I would see the later time that's without coming. Oh, I know, she's back.
Do you wanna try her computer?
Yeah, I'm sure you can. I mean, it's a great
It's technical difficulty.
But we're busy with. That's okay. I don't need the first. But the goal. Oh, yeah, okay. That's really. Yeah, I had now. Next time. Here's wrong. You finally get it. All the strategy, go ahead. Yeah, if I see it in this, I still like, yeah. I'm like, hey. Yeah, that's really. That, I'll make sure. It was good, but can't be done, yeah. I got it. Four hours, and this thing, really. I don't know you have any. Start.
All right,
All right, we are good. Thank you.
we need you to write that down, because I don't want that meeting.
What projector do I need to do? All right, so we are going to skip this next video, but it'll be in the slides, so you can check it out if you want. Both for time and also because that's what went wrong and I know where my learning about projectors is right now, and I have some room to grow. But so this is a story about, or it's just kind of like this one man's experience with CBI, and he does a nice job of explaining. Also, Nicola McDowell, I hope I'm saying her first name right. She has some neat information about her CBI journey. She's a TBI. She's from also Scotland.
Australia.
Dee, you talk
New
about her.
Zealand.
Go ahead, Dee.
Yeah, she's in New Zealand. She just created the Austin assessment, which helps with assessing CBI. She just created this. And she went past the story of living with CBI. And she's also got a simulation about what it's like for her to live with CBI. She also made a comment in one of her presentations that she can probably work about 3 or 4 days, and the next day or two, she has to take the day off because she is so exhausted visually from all the stuff that she's having to take in every day and having to process and map, remap, define, redefine, that it just wipes her out, for a full day, day and a half, 2 days. And so she's very interesting to listen to, and she's very involved in this field.
She's also a vision teacher, so
Yes.
that was really nice. So if you want like a deep dive, she also has an ocular impairment, so she has craniometropia, so she is missing half of her visual field. So that's on top of CBI. That's why I didn't choose to use it as a simulation for you guys, but still worth checking out, like an adult experience. Okay, we're gonna go into the phases of CBI.
So, children with CBI have a range of visual functioning. The CBI range scale assessment is something that we use to figure out what phase that students are in. The results of this assessment are used to determine the strategies and interventions that we would use for the student. Phase 1 is building visual behavior. Phase 2 is integrating vision with function. And phase 3 is refinement of CBI characteristics. These are the characteristics of CBI. Color preference, and we'll kind of hit, and actually, if we just want to keep moving, we hit each one individually to kind of give you a little bit of an idea. But this is an overview of what all of the characteristics of CBI are.
They've added, is that 10 up there?
I was gonna jump in and say,
Yeah.
They're covering now 16.
so for the last decade of my life, I've been assessing in 10 areas, and I've been looking for 10 areas. They've added more, which if I look back on my career, it does kind of hit some of those areas that I feel like maybe we weren't answering all the way. And I just expect that to grow with more research and the more we know.
And first characteristic here is color preference. And this just shows what that would look like in each phase of CBI. So in phase 1, they would have a strong preference for certain colors. Often red or yellow were the colors that we're seeing the most, but child may only look at items in their preferred color. So if that's the case in a school setting, we might use an overlay of some sort to attract their attention. Phase 2, preferred color still dominates, but they also begin looking at objects in additional colors. In phase 3, color preference is fading, and most highly saturated bright colors are regarded. Color highlighting may be used to help draw visual attention to objects or salient features. So this is kind of an example of what some different things we might use with color preference. So in phase 1, you've got your solid yellow slinky. I'm not sure what we're doing.
So that is a red square to mark the bedroom, to give them a visual target of where they need to go, because that's through the doorway, and then there's multiple doors, so there's a little bit of complexity there. So having that color visual target helps that child get to that space. If they're in some room and mom says, you need to go to your room, that's indicating that's their room. That's what we consider that visual target.
So they're
to help them
using,
get there.
I think I told someone, like, we aren't really going into interventions today because there's so much information, but that is the intervention. So doing the assessment helps us identify where they are in the phase. And then which of those areas are more impactful to them at a given time. And then our interventions are based upon the, you know, these phases and the things that Laura's.
And again,
talking about.
using the red outline on the words that we're wanting them to read as well.
Yeah, and we want, because we want them to use their vision, we wanna maximize what's there, and a lot of the visual impairments we work with, we don't necessarily expect to see. I need a different word for this, cause I'm gonna say it and I'll just learn from it, but positive changes, like growth. A lot of times maybe we work with people who are losing their vision over time, or they lose it suddenly. CBI and muscle imbalance, I would say, go in there. So that's like a nice hopeful little springboard, like if you're doing these interventions.
Ping pong.
Yeah, sure. Ping pong, need for movement, that would be a good way to get kids' visual attention.
Yeah.
So need for movement, a lot of times people with CBI, and all of these like need for color, need for movement, they don't just need them for some random reason, they need it to visually attend. And we need to visually attend so that we can motivate development in other ways. So, need for movement in phase 1, kids tend to need a lot more movement, and so, those are probably babies that you see who you don't think are really visually connecting with almost anything, but really love the ceiling fan. So there's light and there's movement. Maybe you don't get a lot of visual attention except for when somebody's walking in or running past. I think of these things as like survival. Like the brain is like, no, we have to keep that, like that helps us survive. Like if you were in the wild and something ran past you, that kind of thing. And I think that way with colors too. For whatever reason, it's why we make street signs red and yellow.
But I do think it's important to note, like, this is what they need to visually attend to a task,
Yeah.
because a lot of babies love ceiling fans, so. You know, that we're not saying if a baby loves a ceiling fan, that baby probably has CBI. We're saying these types of things are needed. If baby's not giving any type of visual attention to anything that's stationary, then we might consider something.
And I do a lot of, I'm sure I look really goofy, but when I'm in homes, I do a lot of just wiggling my fingers. Especially with kids where, and we'll go into field later, but like where we feel like maybe there's a field they're not really paying attention to or attending it. I'm like wiggling my fingers a lot in babies' faces, and I'm sure it looks strange, but I'm just trying to see, can they attend? Can I get them to look toward that? So anyway, broken down into the phases. In phase 2, the movement is still needed, but maybe you don't need it to like for the entire task. Maybe you just needed that movement to get their visual attention, and now that you've got it, you're good. In phase 3, it's less. I would say like fatigue, sickness, stress, the complexity of the entire sensory environment. So if it's really loud, if they're like in a new place, sometimes we see that even if they're like a phase 3 kiddo, they're kind of acting more in the phase 2 or phase 1. So that's what the fluctuating vision of CBI kind of means. Okay, we have 2 pages. All right. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna read.
That's
all
just kind of what you're talking about with
Yeah.
your fingers.
Okay, cool.
Next.
And these are some pictures. So, you've definitely seen light boxes and the spinners and the overlays. We use them a lot. So sometimes we'll use that just to start getting a child to kind of like wake up their vision, for lack of a better term. These shiny pom-poms are also great because they have the shiny, you can get them in different colors. And then they're gonna reflect light and they have movement. So those are tools that we can use for that. Sometimes, I find that the kids themselves will generate the movement to help sustain their vision. Like, I guess like in preschool setting, I've seen that a lot where people are like just moving a lot while they're viewing or just kind of can't sit still, that kind of thing. Visual field preference.
Yes, visual field preference. So in phase 1, the field preferences, so they may use one eye or do the head to use their peripheral, other eye central, localizing object or target in one specific lateral field, In phase 2, visual field preferences persist with actual visual fixation in one additional visual field. And in phase 3, stable in 3 visual field positions, lower visual fields may be atypical. And I'll kind of show you what this means with some of the pictures here. So it's locating what our visual field preference is going to be for babies. So if it's central, or you're presenting to the right, or you're presenting to the left. And that takes some time to kind of figure out with babies, or young kids, to figure out what that might be and how we can accommodate that in the classroom.
It also sometimes changes with their positioning. And so, and sometimes like if they have torticollis, that preference might be because that's what they were able to access for that period of time. The eye gaze assessment, so we are next week,
Yep, next Tuesday.
going for a training with the eye gaze assessment, and the eye gaze assessment uses, is it the Tony Dynavox?
Mhm.
The little eye thingy, I don't know the real word. And it calibrates, like, has anybody done that or gone for like that? Okay.
But they use the iPad and they're, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that uses it has this little thing and it will calibrate the eyes and it kind of figures out where on the screen is that child's, where their eyes are calibrated. So we are using it to map, their visual field preferences. And then get baseline from it, because that tells us where do we want to present a target for this child. And then once we're presenting it there, can we use some of those other characteristics to like movement or whatever to get them into this field? Because that's kind of what we want to do, like we want to expand on that. So that gives us like a nice, it looks kind of like a heat map kind of thing. But it gives us a nice baseline, so we know like, okay, our interventions, are they working? Are we looking right and left now where we weren't before? That kind of thing, so I think if you ever do want us to come out and help with that. Once we're trained.
Oh, yeah, and this will just give you another example of what one point of view might be as a student with CBI.
Okay, complexity. This is kind of what that video, the Gordon Dutton video is sort of hitting on. Phase 1 only looks at objects that are single color. So very, very basic visual, easy to parse. Phase 2, objects may have 2 to 4 colors or patterned surface. 2-dimensional images can be identified on a backlit surface. So maybe they don't have a lot of attention to books yet. But if you add in some light, you might get their attention for that. Phase 3, most high contrast colors and familiar patterns are regarded. 2D images can be identified without backlighting. Again, sometimes it's fatigue, or other reasons, overwhelm. We see phase 3 kids kind of going into phase 2, and a lot in the school, like where we're struggling with reading and the cartoony pictures in a book that kind of have little meaning for them yet, so. Example of choices, when you do have a child who's struggling with visual complexity, so Elmo seems to be a pretty big hit with kids with CDX. Elmo obviously is less complex than, this is not
Ernie.
This is Ernie. Ernie has patterns and all the fun stuff, so I do see that a lot. A lot of kids tend to like Elmo. Also Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, I know that's, we're talking about complexity here.
Big Bird.
Yeah.
Solid yellow as well.
Well, and it's black, yellow,
Yeah.
red, it's backlit on an iPad or a TV, and it's movement. So that seems to be a big hit too. These are symbols from a kit that you can get with the light box. That are kind of correlate with like the phase that you find the child's in. And so this is, again, just looking at less complex, more complex.
This is stemming off of visual complexity, it's visual array. And that was one thing I was gonna say, I'm sure it's kind of confusing because it seems like a lot of it overlaps, like the color preference with, visual complexity. I think that's part of the challenge with diagnosing CBI as well, is because all of it is kind of overlapping. So in phase 1, visual attention only happens when one object is presented at a time on a black background in a room with reduced lighting. For phase 2, visual attention on objects can occur against a background with 2 to 3 colors. They can look at simple books, picture cards, and symbols when the background has 3 to 4 additional elements. So building just a little bit. And then in phase 3, visual attention on objects on highly patterned backgrounds and views and interprets information from 2D materials with complex, visually dense backgrounds. So this gives a little bit of an example. If a child is looking for their toy, it may be more difficult if the toy is in a toy box with a bunch of other toys and there's a lot of color, and this is multiple Sesame Street characters versus a single Bert in a chair, is going to be easier for them to locate. Same with Clifford the Big Red Dog, another popular one. Clifford alone or on a solid black background is going to be easier to be viewed than with other things going on. And then again, same kind of situation, showing the child where the bear is on a solid white background and gradually working towards, okay, find the bear in a room that has a couple more elements, and then again adding even more to try to locate the bear.
And these are pulled, those last ones are pulled from an assessment that we do to see like where the child is able to identify the target as the scene gets more complex. That helps us know. Okay, sensory environment. So for years, I feel like I've talked about complexity of array, just the complexity of the actual object, but we also see a lot of issues when the actual environment itself is really complex, also novel. So if it's just really loud, busy environment, Gordon Dutton, the guy whose video I showed you, he has a lot of simulations like that too, where he shows that like the visual field is narrowing when it's just loud and busy.
Well, it's just like when you're trying to drive your car and concentrate and you turn your
Yes.
radio down.
Yes.
Because you are trying to focus, like.
Yeah, your family thinks you're crazy.
Yeah.
So in phase 1, of course, the environment needs to be more tightly controlled if you want that visual attention, if you want to be successful with that, and you do. So that's usually like a quiet setting, outside of the busyness of the home. People can make those spaces, that would be really lovely if they do that. Phase 2, they can start to tolerate using vision with low levels of background noise. I heard someone say something about like early CBI phases, you're kind of having to choose which sensory channel you're gonna use. And I liked how they said that. In phase 2, you're starting to maintain visual attention to objects that play music. Phase 3, ability to locate a visual target may be affected in novel settings or with multiple competing sensory inputs. So like if you're at a new grocery store or a park or a play place, or something like that. Okay, so these are pictures of some interventions people have done. So they've just turned this TP into not quite a little room, but sort of like that, I guess like a little DIY little room. And so it's kind of like an active learning space for that child and reduces some of the sensory input, and they're putting some high interest targets that are based on the where that child is in their phases. The other one is it tap and see now? On an iPad, which is a moving target, and you can make it any color you want. I tiptoe around iPad stuff, but iPads actually are great for people with CBI because they're backlit, they have movement. I just tiptoe around it because of do we really want them using iPads right now? How does the family feel? That kind of thing. So this family is obviously okay with that. This target moves and you can play with positioning. You can play with the speed of the bear. They're just giving him or her a chance to be able to use vision. We have 10 minutes left. Do you want to skip it or do?
Let's skip the video, and if we have time, we can.
Okay. This is actually the video I was thinking. Sorry. That's okay. He like layers, like loud lunchroom sounds on top of the teacher instructing on top of, it's just very overwhelming, and that's the whole point of it, is like, isn't that overwhelming? Yeah. That's it.
This is again with visual complexity faces. So in phase one, child does not regard faces. Phase two may regard familiar faces like mom and dad, when voices do not compete, so when they don't have that visual stimulation as well. Looks like they're looking through you, not necessarily making eye contact and reciprocating smile or anything like that. Brief eye contact with themselves in the mirror. And then in phase three, eye to eye contact with most people, may look at unfamiliar faces less than familiar faces and enjoys looking in the mirror.
Can I add to that one really quick? Cause I love the looking reading thing, cause I actually do hear that from people a lot. But sometimes I will get parents who say, well, I know that he sees dad when he comes in the door.
Right.
But dad is this big moving target, you know, and if movement draws your visual attention, then maybe that's what's drawing their attention.
And
So
so
not
not
to be
that
confused.
noise can also be associated
Yeah.
with walking into a
Dad's
room
like,
as well.
"Oh."
If dad opens the door and baby hears door and looks over that way, is dad noticing, or is baby noticing dad coming in the room, or did baby hear the door open when they walked in the room?
Very good.
So this is with one point of view, faces are blurred, of unfamiliar people. Oh, okay, we just have one.
Novelty, okay, novelty, functionally, I guess I see this a lot where, I have kiddos who will look at like a very preferred item, whether it's like the bottle or a pacifier or a certain toy. But will neglect looking at most other things in their environment, so that's kind of a phase one. Toys or objects are presented with the child's favorite attributes such as color, shiny, high contrast, or light. These toys will be presented in a controlled environment, otherwise not much visual curiosity. Phase two, new toy will be presented, but it'll have some of the same characteristics as the familiar one. So like if you find that they like the drink, you might also introduce Elmo to add to your toolbox. Phase three, toys and objects continue to have the same characteristics, but the child can find in an enriched environment with lots of distractions. So that's just you seeing them explore visually more and making a more broadened selection of toys to play with. Okay, so this is kind of the same thing. Although I'm not actually sure.
Well, with
What
Winnie the Pooh, Tigger's got some stripes.
That's where we're going. Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Gotcha. I guess all of this is contingent on whether it's novel or not novel to that child.
Right.
But if you have someone who will look at this Winnie the Pooh, you could try a different version of Winnie the Pooh, for example, and a different version in that way too. So just expanding, you're really just expanding what they're able to attend to.
Light. So in phase one, the child may only show visual attention to objects that are lighted and may not be able to be redirected. So once they have their sight set on the lighted object, we are maybe not be redirected to anything else. In phase two, light can be direct visual attention to objects. The child may be distracted by light sources, but can be redirected, sometimes by sound, like, hey, over here, and then getting their attention. Phase three, attention to primary light sources only occurs when the child is tired, stressed, overstimulated, or ill. And backlighting can support the identification of pictures. So that's using that light box that we keep talking about. So again, this is showing a lot of it is with the light box. So using the backlighted light box with some pom-poms to engage student in some sensory play. These are actually part of an FBA kit. They're swirly mats to gain attention as well. And then while feeding, using a spoon that has a light on it as well.
All right, so a lot of times people with CBI tend to have a difficult time with distance viewing, and sometimes if there's no other reason for them to have reduced acuity, the reason is more that if I'm looking here, the scene I'm having to take in is less complex. If I'm looking back here, I have all of this information to take in. So it's just about kind of selecting a more simplified scene to have to parse. So phase one, children with CBI have difficulty with using their distance vision. Objects need to be presented within 1 foot from the child. Even in the school setting, sometimes we'd recommend like a slant board. And it's not because maybe that child needs large print necessarily, or needs to, see it a little more closer, it's just to cut out all the rest of that information. Phase 2, child begins to locate familiar items from 2 to 6 feet away, so they're getting a little more visually curious, a little further out. The object should be placed by itself on a high contrast surface. Child may start noticing moving targets up to 10 feet away, so that's dad's holding in the door. Phase 3, child's able to notice targets up to 10 feet away. They may show visual attention to moving objects 15 to 20 feet away, so playground outside are like a good place to kind of assess that. All right, so here they're just kind of bringing the visual target up closer.
It's just showing that last picture.
The complexity of that too. So further away, you don't really catch that, of course, up close.
Visual latency is the delay between presentation of a visual target and the response from the child. So in phase 1, the delay between presentation of an object or visual target may be quite pronounced. Wait time may be strongly established into routines. This is really hard, I think, for us, for parents when working with their kids. It's like you really have to give them some time, and we're not really sure how much time. It's kind of just trial and error with the kiddos. For phase 2, delay between presentation and response has typically improved, but may increase when child is tired, stressed, or visually fatigued. The wait time may begin decreasing during periods of consistent viewing. And in phase 3, delay will be much less pronounced, but will still occur occasionally when child is visually fatigued, tired, or stressed, or in new environments and settings, or have maybe new materials presented.
Okay, so the absence of visually guided reach. We see that a lot more in phase 1 kids. Children rarely look directly at or fixate on a visual target while reaching. Sometimes they have a look and look away, so that's like, I regard it, I look away and then I'm reaching. I see a lot of kids in phase 1 who are kind of like just searching for things but not looking. Even though, again, like if they've seen an ophthalmologist or an optometrist, they're checking the mark of that box, and it shouldn't be that way, which would flag you. So if you're seeing that kind of stuff, that would flag you. Phase 2, that guided reach, the visually guided reach will be more frequent, more consistent, especially with the preferred objects or preferred colors, isolated use of light to highlight. They may still look and look away, but again, when they're fatigued, overwhelmed, tired, mad at their brother, stuff like that. Phase 3, children continue to struggle with visually guided reach when targets are highly complex or novel. So you're seeing a lot more like identifying the target, reaching, that's in one motion and it looks good, but maybe they're just kind of like falling back when they're overwhelmed, but they do well otherwise. The phase 3 is the area where we're like near normal functioning of vision. We are like 1 or 2 minutes away, so skip it. Although I like that, I mean, yeah, that wait time is so hard because we get into like, we live in a fast culture, so the more wait time we can give, the better we can get them using their vision.
But these are some examples of absent or atypical visual reflexes. So typical visual reflex would be blink to touch on the nose. Defensive blink would be immediate blink, impossible pulling, turning away from rapid movement directly in front of the eye. Usually less consistent presentation than other characteristics, and often one of the first characteristics to resolve through the phases.
Okay, so diagnostics. At the top, fewer than 20% of likely CBI cases may receive a diagnosis. That's from Perkins School for the Blind. If you go to, I think it's either their page or CBI Now, that's a good thing to remember, CBI Now. Good for your own information and then also for connecting parents with resources. They have a really beautiful infographic on their webpage that kind of shows, like there's a map that shows like how many cases of CBI are identified in the United States. And you can see, I actually really like this one, kind of geek out about it a little bit. New Mexico has a lot of CVI cases, but I don't know that that means there's more CVI in New Mexico. What I do know is that New Mexico has, a lot of vision supports for infant toddler.
Mhm.
And they have providers, the CVI Now page also has like ophthalmologists who are comfortable diagnosing CVI and who have said like, hey, I'm comfortable, like, send them to me. So it looks like everybody with CVI lives in New Mexico on that map, and that's not true. We just aren't quite there.
We're
with
working on it,
diagnostics.
so.
So what we kind of want people to do is just, if you're suspecting CVI, gather the risk factor information, call your TBI. Call your O&M when that's appropriate, and start asking questions. The handouts, one of them is like, what to do if you suspect? And I just really like that one. It's like a nice, easy read and less like information dump than our entire presentation. And then the other one is, it's a parent questionnaire. Normally the TBI does this, so I was a little hesitant to share, but I think sometimes when we go to ask parents those questions, they have literally never thought of those, or they're just weird, they're just kind of weird. And so I wanted you guys to have those questions so you can start chatting with them ahead of time, and you'll feel more comfortable going like, well, could you just maybe come take a look? We will do those, or your TBI will do those with the parent. You don't have to do those questions. They're really just for you to know, what are we gonna ask about? What if the doctor doesn't support the diagnosis, but you continue to see visual characteristics that impact their learning and their development? So we are now operating on like a CVI suspect kind of basis, and we can go ahead and do the assessment. We cannot diagnose, but we can do the assessment and we can say, all right, well, let's try this intervention. And if it works, great. I can't really answer that question for how they're gonna handle that in the school side of it in the future, as I do expect like an influx, just like with New Mexico, their numbers are really high. So I can't answer that like down the road, but I think for us now, like all we really want is for them to be able to maximize using their vision, because we know that also impacts their concept development and their development in so many other areas. You hit it, so we're good.
When you went over handouts as well, did that, nice. And these are our references. Yeah.
We're a little
We're
over,
3 minutes over.
we're a little over, but you retrieved that from a van.
I did do that.
So,
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
What would be like your elevator conversation for talking to parents about like introducing CVI, especially if they're not in the medical field, they probably have never heard of it before.
that is.
Yeah, so it's like you have the concerns, or you feel it could be an something, okay. I would say you would say that, like, that's tough too. I would say if the student has one of those,
Risk factor.
yeah,
Yeah.
that we talked about, that's gonna be an easier stair step, because you're gonna be able to say, this is something that is attributed with this. And I was just curious if you've seen X, Y, and Z. I might be seeing it, or I've been seeing it in these visits. How would you feel about having our vision person come out and be involved as well and get an opinion from them? Is how I would, I mean.
I love it. Yeah, that's great.
Did that answer your question? Is that what?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's especially, because we see CVI even when there aren't the, like, those
Right.
risk factors aren't
Yeah.
present, diagnosed or suspected. But, yeah, it's a good springboard. And I feel like it would be appropriate to share things like what to do if you suspect CVI. Like if you're talking to your TBI, you know, maybe that person is like, go ahead and share it. You wanna go ahead and prep them for this. It's kind of a bumpy and awkward road right now. I'm feeling some frustration because, we're meeting more kids.
Yeah.
Just because the program now exists, and then we're sending them to, like, we'll write up like observations, like this is what we see, and we take information from the family and our own observations. And then we ask them to take that to the ophthalmologist when they see them next. They go there and then they send them like to see CVI, which is completely an okay choice, but they also do the same thing as us and they can't diagnose. So we're just sending them in circles, kind of. And that's frustrating for families, and that's the piece I hope we can figure out, a way to make a little more streamlined. Cause like we're doing all the work to like have that conversation. That's why I like that we can just intervene, like we can just offer intervention. even
I
if
think-
We don't have that thing.
And CVI is hard for parents or people that don't have medical backgrounds to kind of understand, because they think you hear vision, so you think your eyes, and really I mean, that's nothing that has to do with your eyes. It's how your brain is processing what your eyes see. So, yeah, I think always just, I've been telling, so I work with Wyandotte, infant toddler, and I've just been telling them, like, when in doubt, invite me out. Like, I would rather you have me come out and let me assess and kind of no pun intended, lay eyes on the child. Than this, go by for however 3 years before they reach preschool. So.
Cause then we see those issues in the school side, and like now we're struggling with reading. Yeah.
Another question regarding the phases, like, is that fluid? They move through these, or you are in a phase, you intervene in that phase, and that's where you're gonna be? Or does it help you get to the next?
Yeah, so
If they.
Input?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
we expect improvement, we can speed that up, right? Or what we hope. And so, and again, I do come from the school side, so it's only my second year in the toddler, but a lot of time, especially there, we segment specialists, right? Like, all right, the vision lady is gonna come and she's gonna fix his vision, and then PT is gonna come, she's gonna fix all that stuff. So I love that you guys have this like all-in-one way of doing it, because the interventions for CBI absolutely have to be throughout their routine, the routine of their day. So back to your point, we do tend to reassess those areas more than we would for other visual impairment, because we expect to see growth, we hope for growth, and we're targeting where they are, but like with a slight encouragement into the next phase, if that makes sense. Like, you can't just force somebody to visually reach, but you can do other things to get them to do that, and just repetition.
Yeah. And always giving them the chance for that growth as well. I mean, you don't want to keep them stagnant. We're always giving them the opportunity to grow.
But I do see sometimes that people will go, he just loves the ceiling fans, and that's what I do to keep him happy, because my life is chaos and he's happy doing that.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys are pressed on time.
No,
Um,
we're good. Or, I mean,
so for diagnosing, I guess I got confused with the picture of the MRI. Is that a diagnostic tool yet?
sorry, thank you so much for asking. This is our first run for this one, so I'm taking notes. It is not a diagnostic tool that people in Kansas are going to be using. That was for research purposes. Maybe one day, I have that question too, like maybe one day we can do that. Maybe one day I won't be saying there's not like a lab you can run or whatever. But right now, no, the diagnosis really is the ophthalmologist talking to the parents about how that child uses his or her vision, what they're observing, and then if we can get a report sent to them as well to help. That goes.
So are kids, the different characteristics, are they usually, most of the characteristics are in the same phase, or can they have like a color thing in one phase and a different characteristic in a different phase?
Well, yeah, so you can have, we call it resolved or unresolved, you can have resolved characteristics and still fall into, because it's kind of like an average of a whole, fall into a phase one. So you can be a phase one kid, but certain areas, you either never struggled with that or
Right.
no longer struggle with that.
Which is a good thing to point out. They may not, they're not going to necessarily fit every single characteristic.
Right.
You may have a child that has visual latency, but does not have a color preference. They can kind of change, which is why CVI is so complex. I mean, there really are a lot of moving pieces in it.
Yeah, it really is.
Anything else? Thank you guys so much for being patient with us with the projector. We appreciate it.
I can see people's faces.